Morning of my brother's wedding, I wore a blue dress I'd bought at a Target in San Diego 3 weeks earlier. Nothing special. $22. I remember thinking that was probably appropriate. Nothing about my presence that day was supposed to be special. I had driven 4 hours from the base to get there, took personal leave. Didn't tell anyone I was coming because the last time I called home, my father had told me not to bother. That was 8 months before. I parked down the street from the Zenu, a rented event hall outside Columbus, Ohio, with white flower arrangements in the windows and a sign that said, "Congratulations, Ethan and Sophia." I sat in my car for a while. I watched people go in. Cousins I recognized, my aunt from Cincinnati, my father's golf friends in blazers that didn't quite fit. I almost left. But Ethan was my brother. And nobody, not even my father, was going to make me miss watching him get married. I should explain something first. For most of my adult life, my family believed I was, in their words, drifting. That was the word my father used. Not failing, not lost. Drifting, like I was a piece of furniture someone had pushed into a river and was watching float away without any particular urgency. I had left college after 2 years. That part was true. What they didn't know, what I never explained because at the time I was 20 years old and didn't know how to make anyone understand, was that I had enlisted in the Navy 2 weeks after withdrawing. I reported to Officer Candidate School in Pensacola, Florida in October. I graduated in January. I didn't call home to tell them. I know how that sounds. I thought about it a lot over the years, lying awake in bunks and later in much nicer quarters, going over it in my mind. The honest answer is that I knew exactly what my father would say, and I didn't have the emotional capacity to hear it while simultaneously trying to survive the hardest physical and psychological challenge of my life. So I made a choice. I protected myself. My mother had passed when I was 16. After that, my father remarried within 18 months, a woman named Sandra who was perfectly pleasant and also perfectly uninterested in anything that didn't directly involve her own 2 kids. Ethan was 4 years younger than me and had been my father's unambiguous favorite since the day he was born. Not because my father was cruel exactly. More because my father had a very specific idea of what a daughter was supposed to do, and I had never once done any of it. I didn't play piano. I didn't join student council. I didn't date the kind of boys who got invited to Sunday dinners. I ran track, fixed car engines with my grandfather, and spent most of my teenage years reading military history books I borrowed from the library. My father didn't know what to do with me, so eventually he stopped trying. By the time I enlisted, we talked maybe twice a year. Birthdays, sometimes Christmas. Short calls where he'd ask if I was still doing that job thing, and I'd say yes, and he'd sigh like I'd told him I was still eating cereal for dinner. I made lieutenant junior grade in my 3rd year, lieutenant in my 5th. I was deployed twice. The second time, to the Persian Gulf, I was the only woman on a logistics coordination team of 11. I did my job. I did it well. I got promoted again. I didn't call home to report any of this. Not because I was hiding. Because I genuinely did not believe anyone there would care. The wedding ceremony was supposed to start at 2 o'clock. I walked in at 1:55, slipping into a seat near the back, end of the row, close to the wall. The kind of seat you sit in when you might need to leave quickly and don't want to make a scene doing it. For a few minutes, it was fine. The hall was warm. Someone had chosen good music, something instrumental and soft that I didn't recognize. I could see Ethan at the front, standing with his groomsmen, laughing at something. He looked good, happy. He'd grown into himself in the years I'd been away. I felt something I wasn't prepared for, watching him. Something that sat between grief and gratitude, and I didn't know what to call it. Then my father saw me. He was coming down the side aisle, probably heading to speak to someone near the front, when his eyes landed on my face. He stopped walking. I watched the exact moment the recognition hit him, a small tightening around his eyes, the way his jaw set. He walked toward me. "What are you doing here?" he said. He kept his voice low, because there were people around. That was the only reason. "I'm here for Ethan's wedding," I said. "Ethan's wedding is for family." He said it like that settled something. I'm family. He looked at me the way he'd been looking at me since I was 17, like I was a problem he'd been asked to solve and had given up on. "You couldn't even call for his engagement. You haven't been home in 2 years. You show up today like nothing happened and expect to just sit here?" I didn't answer that. mostly because the answer was complicated and the ceremony was about to start, and I wasn't going to do this here, in these seats, in front of his golf friends. I'm not causing any trouble, I said. I just want to see my brother get married. Then you should have acted like his sister when it mattered. He said it quietly, but the woman in the row ahead of us shifted in her seat. She'd heard. You need to leave, he said. I'm asking you. Don't make today about you. I sat very still. I had been in rooms where people had shouted at me, questioned my decisions, questioned my capability, questioned my right to be there. I had learned over many years how to go very quiet inside my own body when the world got loud. I picked up my small purse. I stood up. I had already started moving toward the aisle. I want to stop here for a second because I think this is the part people find hard to understand. If you've never been in that position, where the cost of staying is higher than the cost of leaving, it probably looks like weakness, like giving up, like I should have stood my ground. But here's the thing I've learned. Sometimes you leave not because you've lost, but because the room isn't worth what it would cost you to stay in it. I had been choosing my battles since I was 20 years old. I knew which ones mattered. I was almost to the back doors when I heard him. Excuse me, ma'am. I turned around. There was a man standing in the aisle about 10 feet back. Tall, dark-haired, maybe 35, in a gray suit with a small boutonniere on his lapel. He was looking directly at me. There was something careful in his expression, not hesitant exactly. More like someone who had made a decision and was committed to it. It was Ethan's best man. I'd seen him at the front earlier. His name was James. I would learn that later. He and Ethan had gone to Ohio State together. Are you Ethan's sister? He asked. I said yes. He nodded slowly. Then I need you to come with me for a second. I looked at him. He looked back at me. My father was still visible somewhere behind me, and I could feel the particular energy of someone waiting to see how a situation resolves. Why? I asked. Because, James said. And there was something in his voice that I recognized. The specific calm of someone who has authority and is choosing not to announce it. Ethan has been asking about you for 2 days. And because I know who you are, that last part landed strange. I followed him. He took me through a side door into a small anteroom that smelled like carpet cleaner and artificial flowers. Ethan was there, in his suit, tie already slightly crooked, fiddling with his cufflinks the way he'd been fiddling with things since we were kids whenever he was nervous. He looked up when I walked in. For a moment, neither of us said anything. You came, he said. Of course I came, I said. He crossed the room in about 2 steps and hugged me. He was taller than I remembered. He smelled like the same soap he'd used since high school, which made no sense. But there it was. I felt the thing that had been sitting in my chest since I parked the car finally release its grip slightly. Dad said, he started. I know what Dad said. He pulled back and looked at me. I invited you. I sent the invitation to the address you gave me. I know. I got it. Then why didn't you, Ethan? I said it gently. Can we talk about this after you get married? He laughed, a short, surprised sound. Yeah, okay. He rubbed the back of his neck. Will you stay? After what, I'll handle Dad, James said from behind me. He was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, watching us with an expression I couldn't fully read. You just get out there. I found a seat near the side, not the back this time. I let myself be there. The ceremony was beautiful. Sophia, Ethan's wife, cried during her vows, the good kind of crying. And Ethan held her hand so carefully, like something precious he'd been trusted with. My aunt from Cincinnati caught my eye across the aisle and gave me a small, uncertain smile. I gave one back. My father sat 3 rows ahead of me. He didn't turn around. At the reception, held in the same hall with the chairs rearranged and the lights turned warmer, I found a seat at a table near the back and stayed there. People I didn't know introduced themselves. I was polite. I was fine. I had learned over many years how to take up exactly as much space as required and no more. I was on my 2nd glass of water when my father found me. He sat down across from me without asking. He looked older than I remembered. Not in a way that made me feel sorry for him, exactly. but in a way that reminded me that time had passed for everyone, not just me. James told me something, he said. I waited. He stopped. Something moved across his face. He said, you're a commander in the Navy. Lieutenant commander, I said. I was promoted 6 months ago. He stared at me. You've been in the Navy. Since I was 20, for 11 years. Yes. He sat with that for a moment. Around us, the reception moved and shifted, glasses clinking, someone laughing too loud at a nearby table, the band starting to warm up in the corner. Why didn't you tell me? He finally said. It was a genuine question. I could tell by the way he asked it. Not accusatory, not defensive. Just a man sitting across from his daughter trying to understand an 11-year gap. Because, I said carefully, every time I called home, you asked if I was still drifting, and I didn't have the energy to convince you I wasn't, while also trying to do the job I was doing. He looked at the table. And after a while, I said, it stopped occurring to me that you'd want to know. That landed. I watched it land. I would have wanted to know, he said quietly. I know that now, I said. I didn't know it then. James found me later, near the end of the night, while I was standing outside on the venue's small patio watching the parking lot. I hope I didn't overstep, he said. Telling him. How did you know? I asked. About my rank. Ethan mentioned you were in the Navy ages ago, and then I looked you up. He said it plainly, without embarrassment. I was curious. I have a lot of respect for people who serve. You didn't have to intervene. No, he agreed. But you were walking out the door. He paused. And Ethan would have spent his whole wedding wondering where you went. I thought about that. Thank you, I said. He nodded. We stood there for a moment in the kind of companionable silence that doesn't require filling. For what it's worth, he said. I don't think the rank is the point. I looked at him. I think the point is that you've spent 11 years doing something real and hard, and you did it without anyone's permission or approval. That's worth something regardless of what's on your uniform. I didn't know what to say to that. So I didn't say anything. I've been back 3 times since then. Once for Thanksgiving, 6 months later. Once for Thanksgiving, 6 months later. Once for my nephew's first birthday, Ethan and Sophia's son, born the following spring. He has Ethan's same anxious hands. Once, just recently, to help my father move some furniture after Sandra left him. A story that is not mine to tell, though I will say I was not surprised. Things with my father are not fixed. I want to be honest about that because I think stories like mine often end with a tidy reconciliation scene and everyone crying and forgiving and going home changed. That's not what happened. What happened is slower and less cinematic. He calls sometimes now. We talk for maybe 15 minutes. He asks about my work in a way that's still slightly uncertain, like he's asking about a hobby he doesn't fully understand. I answer. I ask about his garden, which he's taken up since retiring. It's not what I wished we had. But it's something, and something, I've learned, is not nothing. I think about what that commenter said once, in a thread I stumbled across a while back. Someone asking whether a daughter like me, one who'd kept her distance and her silence for so long, deserved to have her family come back around. And someone else replied, but what if she'd never become a lieutenant commander? Would she still deserve it then? I've sat with that question for a long time. The answer, I think, is yes. Of course, yes. Not because of rank or salary or any external proof of worth, but because she was their daughter and she was trying, in the only way she knew how, to survive and to become someone she could respect. That should have been enough. That should have always been enough. My father didn't come back around because I'm a lieutenant commander. I want to believe he came back around because he finally got tired of the distance. Because somewhere in the accumulation of years and silence and one blue dress and a best man who knew when to speak up, somewhere in all of that, he found something worth recovering. I don't know if that's true, but I'm willing to find out. My brother called me last week to tell me Sophia is pregnant again. He was so happy he could barely finish his sentences, kept laughing and starting over. I sat in my car outside the commissary on base and listened to him and laughed with him and thought, this is what I drove 4 hours for. Everything else, the blue dress, the back row seat, my father's face when he first saw me, James in the aisle saying ma'am, All of it was the price of admission. I'd pay it again. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since that day, not in any grand philosophical way. Just the ordinary, quiet way you think about things when you're driving alone on a long stretch of highway and your mind finally has room to move. My father didn't push me away because he was a bad man. He pushed me away because he had a fixed idea of what I was, and I never fit it, and neither of us had the tools back then to bridge that gap. I left. I went quiet. I built a life in the only direction that felt like mine. Those choices had consequences: years of silence, missed holidays, a brother who grew up without his sister fully present. I don't get to skip past that part just because things are better now. The distance cost all of us something real. But here's what I've also come to understand. The choices I made, even the painful ones, were the ones that allowed me to become someone I could actually respect. I didn't enlist to prove something to my father. I enlisted because it was the first time in my life I'd stood in front of something hard and felt something click into place. That feeling of doing work that asks everything of you and finding out you have more to give, that's not something anyone can hand you. You have to walk toward it yourself, usually without anyone cheering you on. That's the part I wish I could go back and tell my 20-year-old self. Not that it would get easier, or that my father would eventually come around, or that James would be standing in that aisle at exactly the right moment. None of that was guaranteed. What I would tell her is this: the work you do in private when no one is watching and no one is keeping score is not wasted, it accumulates. It becomes the person you are when the moment finally arrives that asks you to be something. My father came back around, slowly, imperfectly, in 15-minute phone calls about nothing in particular. I think he came back because the version of me he met at that reception was someone who had clearly learned how to carry hard things without collapsing under them. He saw that. And I think somewhere in him, something that had been locked for a long time, finally had reason to open. Ethan always knew who I was. That's the thing about the people who love you without conditions. They don't need your resume. He wanted me at his wedding because I was his sister. Full stop. And James, a man I had never met before that day, chose to act on what he knew when it would have been far easier to stay out of it. That kind of quiet courage is its own form of intelligence. He didn't make a speech. He didn't start a confrontation. He just walked down the aisle and said ma'am and changed the whole trajectory of that afternoon. I think about that a lot, the small acts that cost someone almost nothing but mean everything to the person receiving them. That's worth paying attention to. That's worth practicing. The story doesn't end with my father transformed and everyone reconciled and some tidy lesson bow tied on top. It ends with me calling Ethan back when he tells me Sophia is pregnant again. It ends with me building something, slowly, out of what remains. That's enough. That's actually quite a lot.